the African Union really only became exercised and started getting into the act of criticising the court when the court issued an arrest warrant for a sitting head of state, President al-Bashir of Sudan. The African Union didn't seem to get too worried when it was people at lower levels. They got worried, I think, when a head of state was indicted and an arrest warrant was issued. So this is a problem. It has to be taken into account. But I'm fairly confident that history will prove that it was one of the birth pains of what is still really a very new institution. During the 20th century, civilians became increasingly targeted in war. You know, interesting statistics were brought out by Mary Kaldor of the London School of Economics. In World War I, the ratio of soldiers to civilians killed was about 9 to 1. 9 soldiers for every civilian. Because in those old-fashioned days, armies fought against armies. They didn't implicate civilians if they didn't have to. In World War II, it became 1 to 1. 1 civilian killed for every soldier. It's killed and injured. And that's not surprising when you think that cities were attacked in World War II on both sides. And of course it ended up with 2 Japanese cities being hit with the atomic bomb. So civilians were intentionally aimed at by armies. In the Korean War, it was 8 to 1. 8 civilians for every soldier. In the Vietnam War, it was 9 to 1. 9 civilians for every soldier. In some 200 plus civil wars since the Second World War, millions of people killed, 90% of them civilians, because army fought against civilians. I believe it's beginning to change. I think withdrawing immunity from war criminals for attacking civilians is making a difference. And certainly in the NATO action in Serbia over Kosovo in 1999, 78 days of the heaviest bombing since World War II, a very small number of civilians in comparison. So after 78 days, the number of Serb civilians was approximately 500, and about 6,000 were injured, a remarkably low casualty rate. And I had the privilege, I suppose, of asking questions from senior leaders in the Pentagon and the German army. I said, how do you account for the fact that there was suddenly this reversal and low civilian casualties? And the answers I got from both Bonn then and from Washington, D.C. were twofold. They said, one is we now have precision instruments. There's precision bombing. I mean, if the Americans or any sophisticated army want to take us out in this room and leave everybody in the next room unhurt, they can do it. There is that a degree of precision. And they said the other reason was the presence of the Yugoslavia Tribunal. They said if we aimed at civilians or endangered civilians negligently, let alone intentionally, the Yugoslavia Tribunal had jurisdiction and our leaders could have been charged with war crimes. So I wish I could give you an example of deterrence coming from an evil, oppressive society. The examples I've given are from NATO countries, but I think deterrence is obviously difficult to establish. How do you prove what would have happened but for international criminal justice? And I believe there is a reason for some optimism, even in the area of deterrence. So there's a great diversity, obviously, across the many peoples of the world, east to west, and particularly in their conceptions of what is right and what is good. But the ICC, I would suggest, represents a core set of commitments about which there can be no dispute. War crimes are war crimes are war crimes, whether you come from the east or the west or the north or the south. Systematic mass rape, aiming at innocent civilians, are as abhorrent to all people, no matter where on our globe they live. So the ICC, I would suggest, is a universal moral vision around which all people in the world can join in one voice, unified at long last to proclaim that we are all brothers and sisters in our world. And for the first time in history, we will not permit people to be victims of such crimes any longer, wherever they may occur. Of course, a weakness is double standards, and that's a fact we have to live with. The United States, Russia, China, India have not joined in the International Criminal Court. The United States is ambivalent. The United States thinks international criminal justice is great, but for the rest of the world, leave us out. And they will pay money and they'll support it, but they won't join in, and they won't allow an international court to put on trial either their leaders or the leaders of countries that they consider under their protection. And of course, it's a weakness. For China and Russia, the International Criminal Court is simply bad news. They're not interested in it under any circumstances. And there isn't even the ambivalence that there is in the United States. So it's a weakness of the system, and one can only hope that in the years to come, those countries will be forced by their own people or by the international community to join in. It's a weakness we have to live with. But the question again is the bottom line. Is some justice better than no justice? Or are we better off with no justice at all? I would suggest the answer is an obvious one. So the question that we have to deal with, as I said earlier, is whether we are a better world in which all war crimes are credibly and efficiently investigated, and those guilty of war crimes prosecuted and appropriately punished. In other words, to continue to withdraw impunity from war criminals. I cannot believe that we would have a better and more peaceful world if we revert to the pre-World War II situation in which war criminals were effectively beyond the reach of justice. If we care about the victims of war crimes and their rightful claims for justice, the solution isn't obvious. So I think we must admit their problems. It's not easy. Human institutions can never be perfect. Errors are made, there are delays, and so forth. But we've got to keep our eyes on that bottom line. I think too, and let me end on this note, I think too many people put too much of a load on criminal justice. Criminal justice is but one of the tools in the armory of people who want to avoid wars and protect civilians. I would prefer to see more done to prevent wars. Criminal justice comes after the wars have claimed their victims. It's too late to protect the civilians. So the difficulties I mentioned are manifold. But one thing I have no doubt is it's worth the effort. 121 nations have now joined. African countries are leading the pack. There are more African ratifications of the International Criminal Court, of the Rome Statute, than there are from any other UN region. So that's I think to the credit of Africa, and I think it's important that our continent sees the position in the true light and the true fact to which I referred. So the answer I would give to the question given to me is that the investment on international criminal justice and the International Criminal Court has paid off. I'll be happy to answer questions.